Brazil 2, Japan 1. A bit of a shaky start for Brazil, but eventually they completed what I would call a dramatic comeback. So naturally, we will start off with the first half, where I genuinely believe Japan were a far better side. In the first half, I thought Brazil were all over the place, to be honest, and lucky not to be a couple of goals behind. And that was because Japan looked like they had more ideas, more plans and more solutions to the questions that were in front of them. And it largely started with Brazil trying to play the ball out from the back. You know, we know that all top nations like to do this. They like to play the ball from the goalkeeper to the centre-backs and slowly move forward. The problem for Brazil, though, early on was that Japan were aggressive with their approach out of possession. And what they would often do is tweak the structure slightly so it becomes a bit more of a 3-4-1-2. But what they did was they got the two wing-backs in positions where they were ready to jump to the two Brazilian full-backs. Now, they don't literally go and stand on them, but they don't need to. They can hold this sort of half and half position where they're half marking a winger, half marking a fullback, and they just jump where they're needed, basically. So when Alisson has the ball over here and is trying to play out from the back, there isn't really an obvious pass for him. Because we can see now, the midfielders are all tied up in the centre here with the Japanese midfielders. The fullbacks are unavailable because the wingbacks can jump, and the two centre-backs are marked as well. So for Brazil, in the opening stages of this game, you know, especially the first half hour of the match, they just really struggled to find any rhythm. And that's because Japan was so keen to jump and be aggressive and try to put them under pressure. Now, naturally, Brazil did eventually find ways to play forward. For example, someone like Casemiro can drop deeper to form a back three, and the Japanese players are now a little bit uncertain about going into that pressing moment. So as we would always expect, there were moments where Brazil could move the ball a little bit further forward, even in the first half where they struggled. But the struggles sort of continued in their performance. They still struggled to find rhythm, and they certainly still struggled to find a way through the Japanese team. And I think that word through is very important. We talk about this a lot, especially on the AJ Analysis channel. We talk about playing through teams, we talk about playing around teams, and we talk about playing over or past teams as well. And what Brazil were really trying to do in the first half was play through this Japanese side, through the middle of the pitch. And I completely understand why a team would want to do that. Because if you can play through the centre, you know, straight through the spine of a team, you can penetrate close to goal as possible. Ultimately, the goal is in the centre of the pitch. So to score goals, the ball at some point has to be in the centre. So I understand why Brazil wanted to play in this way, but there were just a couple of things that didn't really make sense. For example, I love Bruno Guimaraes. I think he is an incredible footballer. For a long time, I have felt that he is one of the best midfielders on this planet. But what Brazil did was often pushed him really high, sort of in between the lines, where he's capable of playing, but I just don't think you're getting the most out of him from that position. I think he's better when he's deeper facing play. And Brazil had this issue where they just couldn't move the ball through what was a very compact Japanese defensive unit. If we just sort of mark some of these players for Japan that are going to be defending in central areas, you can see there's a lot of players in there, right? And you can understand now why Brazil might find it difficult to poke through. The big problem that Brazil had was when they lost possession. So the upside here is if you are able to be successful, you are in the middle of the pitch, you're straight in on goal, you can score. But if you're unsuccessful and if you lose the ball, you're going to be producing a lot of central turnovers, a lot of central ball losses. And they're incredibly dangerous because it means the likes of Kamada in midfield can now pick up the ball and break. And for Brazil, only really having Casemiro defending as a solo pivot, this was a big problem. The Japan side in the first half, anytime they won the ball and were able to spring forward, they looked very, very dangerous. Japan were also dangerous when they were building their own moves as well. So this wasn't just about sitting low in the block and trying to play on transition. There were moments where this Japan side could take the ball, play out from the back. They're a very confident bunch, very technical players, a lot of them. And I think in the first half, they were quite sharp with their action. It's one of those games where for 45 minutes, every decision that you make seems to be the right one. So every time you play a pass, you're going to pick the right one. You know, that's when you're in that flow state. And that was the case for this Japanese team in the first half. And something that they were really able to exploit was the three central midfielders for Brazil. Now, the problem for Brazil here is you've got three central midfielders, which on paper seems okay. But Japan are going to be playing with four. And for Brazil, Casemiro is really lacking the legs, isn't he? Lacking the energy. I am a huge Manchester United fan, so I've seen this side of Casemiro before. But for the Japanese side, because I've got the double pivot in Kamada and Sano, when they've got these two players in front of them as well, they end up with a four. And 4 players against 3 is a problem, especially when you've got 2 players here either side of Casemiro. Those are situations that Casemiro just cannot deal with. And throughout the first half of this match, he was in a real spot of bother. The Japanese central play was too evasive. They were too slick on the turn. We saw that in the build-up to the goal. The Casemiro just gets completely done and can't keep up with the play. He's completely outplayed in that situation. For me, he approaches it wrong, but we've seen this from him before. He's often quite aggressive in the way that he tries to approach the ball, almost forgetting his physical limitations, where if he goes aggressive and doesn't get it right, he can't recover. And he's got that problem for Brazil, and he had that in this game, and that's where the Japanese goal came from. It was too easy to play through the centre of this Brazil team. And, going into half-time, I thought Brazil were in real trouble, because on the ball, they weren't offering enough. They weren't finding ways through the Japan side. They weren't finding enough different solutions. And defensively, both in transitions and also in settled play, I thought Brazil looked really, really vulnerable. Actually, just really poor. But of course, that changed. Now, in terms of personnel, the changes for Brazil weren't that drastic. We saw Paqueta come off with a knock, Cunha dropped a little bit deeper into midfield, and Endrick came onto the pitch up front. But initially for Brazil, it doesn't look like too much is going to change in terms of the shape and the structure. But actually, in terms of the way that we saw it play out, there was a big change for Brazil. But they were also helped by Japan, in my opinion, just being too passive, too cautious. I pointed out this problem in the first match day of the campaign. It was Japan against Netherlands. You can watch that video on this channel if you want to go back and watch it. But one of my criticisms was, I thought Japan looked good. I thought they looked dangerous. They looked like they could hurt anyone. But I said, if they're going to be this passive throughout the tournament, someone with better quality is going to hurt them. And I think we saw that in the second half of this game, because Japan really retreated into their back 5, which is absolutely fine to do. I understand the benefits of playing low, but it's low, and then there's what Japan were doing. And for parts of this second half, they were just far too deep. And, that's a major criticism of this Japan side. It's not good enough. They've got to be braver. They've got to be bolder. You're playing with a lead. And what we've seen so far at this World Cup is you can't rest on your laurels. You've got to go at teams. You've got to really make the most of it when you're on top. But Japan didn't do that. They chose to sat deeper and deeper. But I also think they were forced to play deeper as well by a good Brazil side, who now did a much better job of stretching the pitch. In the first half, we saw Brazil trying to play through the centre, and it not really working, and Japan counter-attacking. What we saw in the second half was both fullbacks, Danilo and Santos, playing much higher and much wider, much more consistently. So what this does is it stretches the pitch. It stretches Japan across the pitch, sort of horizontally. So if Santos is out here providing width and Danilo's doing the same over here, these Japanese wing-backs and wide midfielders just get stretched a little bit wider. And when you stretch teams wider in this way, what you do is you open up more gaps in the middle. What Brazil did beyond that was they just played in an incredibly brave way. They chucked so many players forward. And I don't think enough teams are doing this at the World Cup, especially the big sides. They're not committing enough forward players into the box. I think England are one of the teams that are doing it well, and we discussed that yesterday. But not enough other teams are, until Brazil did in the second half. They really started pushing players further forward into the box. And again, it feels harsh, but this is where I am going to be critical of Japan. Now, I understand you're 1-0 up against a top footballing nation with some serious quality, but I just hate seeing teams dropping into a really low block. Do I get the benefit of it? Yes, absolutely. We've all seen it before. A smaller team that will sit deep, be compact, and just frustrate the opposition for 90 minutes. They'll get 11 players behind the ball, they'll fight for their lives, put their bodies on the line, and get a result. But I just always think you are inviting pressure. And when you invite pressure, you also invite a bit of misfortune. I think the second that the opposition have the ball in these areas a lot, it might be a long-range screamer. It might be a moment of magic from Brazil. But also, it could be a deflection that goes out for a corner. It could be a deflection that flies into the top corner. It could be a mistake from a defensive player. Anything like that. I just think when you sit so deep, you are inviting these consistent waves of pressure. And, that consistent pressure, that consistent tension is going to cause something to crack. And for Japan, it did. And I just think they got it wrong in the second half by being a bit too defensive. But I also think Brazil do deserve credit, because I said they were poor in the first half, and I really think they were. They looked like they had no idea. But in the second half, they pushed the fullbacks right high up the pitch. Of course, Gabriel really high up the pitch as well. And they just swung crosses into the box. Look how many crosses they put in the second half. It was weird to see a Brazil team play in this way. It's not the traditional beautiful Yoga Bonito that we're used to. It's not full of flair and trickery and skill and personality. but it's incredibly efficient and effective. Get the ball into wide areas. If that's where the space is, push your fullback into this position, because now you stretch Japan. Now you're playing wide, you're playing round them, so they can't counterattack in the same way. And then get that ball in the box. Right, it sounds really, really simple, but football can be a very simple sport sometimes. Get the ball into the danger area frequently enough, and honestly, just see what is going to happen. And for Brazil, it eventually led to the goal with Casemiro, and then the second goal in the last second. I think Bruno Guimaraes deserves so much credit for the technical quality and the composure in the moment. The way that he just sort of stops on the edge of the penalty area, time freezes, and then he picks his pass, I think is serious, serious quality. I don't think he had an amazing first half, but I think he made up for it with that action alone. It's high quality play, purely because of the composure. The actual pass itself is quite simple, but the composure to make that decision is fantastic. And it's why I think eventually, overall, Brazil did deserve the win, because for me, they were the team that went for it. And I think that's what successful teams have to do at this tournament. Now, there is an argument on being a little bit harsh on Japan. Ultimately, 11 versus 11, they lack the quality that the Brazil team do. So they can't play in the same way as what the top sides can. But I just think there's quality in that Japanese team. And I think when they play on the front foot, when they press high, still be compact as a unit, of course. But when they press high and go after teams, I really think they can cause problems. And they just didn't do that enough for me in the second half. As for Brazil, they were brave, and I love to see bravery rewarded. You know, we saw the centre-back high in the final third putting the cross into the box for their holding midfielder to crash the header into the back of the net. And, you know, that wasn't last second kitchen sink time. That was Brazil just being more positive, more aggressive, more progressive with how they were playing. And I think it's great to see Ancelotti adapting. You know, the first half was all about central play. To see him at half-time make the tweak, put that emphasis on wider play and put those crosses into the box, and then to see it work, I think is a great thing to see. And it's what the top nations have. It's that ability to tweak a game. They've got so many different profiles that they can use to make these small changes to hurt the opposition. So that's why I think eventually Brazil did deserve to win this game. I still think they've got to be incredibly careful as they go into this tournament. The defence is concerning. The defence is very, very concerning for Brazil, but it's probably the same for most of the top teams. And like the other top teams, their forward quality is so absurd that they can still beat anyone. So that is still where I stand on Brazil. I'm not convinced by them. I don't think they're going to batter their way to the end of the tournament, but I think they could still win it because they have so much quality. But those are just my thoughts, my opinions. I want to hear yours in the comments down below. What did you think of this match? What was the problem for Brazil in the first half? What did they do differently in the second half? And did they deserve the win? And how far can they go? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. But apart from that, we are now finished. So thank you very much for watching this one. I hope you have enjoyed it. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.